What up, everybody? DungeonMattster back with another video. This week we're going to continue where we left off with the carnival, make some tiny little ticket booths for the entrance to our carnival so that we can have something to walk through when we go into the carnival grounds. So stick around. After the intro, we'll get right into it. Hey everybody, let's get into it. I decided to make my booths a little bit taller than the height of a 28mm miniature. And for this, I went with a 2-inch height by a 1.5-inch base so that there'd be plenty of room to stick a miniature on the inside. Here I'm just using some 3/16-inch wooden dowels that I had from a previous project that I had unused. I split the difference between the thickness of the dowel and the size of the base that I wanted. So you'll notice I cut some smaller pieces here to be the in-between bits that would form the square shape of the booth. And then I just glued the pieces together with some super glue. This didn't take very long. What you can see here, I just wanted to show you every step of the process. Once I got the basic rectangular shape, I decided to add some cross beams that would add further support and allow me to have extra space to attach some wood slats to later. Once I had my basic shapes laid out, I started gluing the rest of them together using the same smaller pieces. You'll notice I leave one side without a cross pattern, and that's because I wanted to have one side of this be open so that I could fit the miniature inside from the back. And anything that doesn't fit just gets sanded down slightly until it does. Next, I cut out a floor from some 3/16-inch thick balsa sheet. I just laid the form, or the frame, on top of it, traced it out, and then cut notches for the corners. A little bit of glue makes it all fit together. Here I'm going to use the same 3/16 inch thick balsa sheet, some scrap pieces to form the front counter shelf for the front of my ticket booths. Unfortunately, I missed the shot with my camera as I'm testing a new setup, so I apologize if you folks can't see what I'm doing here. Next, I took some 3/8 inch thick balsa planks and started to cut those down to fit around the outside of my ticket booth. And again, I just glued these in place using some liquid super glue. Well, I went to do the second of the two booths, and as I started going, I realized I was not going to have enough planking left. But I did have some of this left. It's just a hair thicker, but it's barely noticeable. It's a piece of the sheet balsa. It has a different grain. I'm not worried about that. But what I was worried about was getting decent plank cuts off of it. So what I did was I whipped up this little tool real quick to use to make planks. It's just an X-Acto blade and some screws on a block. And now if I've put this thing together correctly, I should be able to just rip down some planks. So let's see how this works. See if I can keep it straight first of all. I have to adjust my angle here. I'll be damned, that worked like a charm. Huh, that's pretty decent. All right, so I'll rip myself down some more planks and we'll keep going. Oh, and just a quick warning, you might want to be careful with X-Acto blades because I definitely cut myself. I poked myself with it. So just beware. Just be cautious when you're doing stuff like this. Next, we're going to take some macrame cloth. Some people call it granny grading. And we're going to use this for the front portion of our ticket booth, where I was going to put a window or some bars, but I decided that this would be the easier, simpler solution, although I think now in retrospect that the other parts would have looked better. Next, I made a 5/8 inch wide fascia plate for the front top of the booth, which is going to end up being where I put a label later that's going to show basically some signage for the front of the ticket booth. This is completely optional, but I felt like this would give the booth a little bit more height since it was starting to look a little stunty, so I wanted it to look a little bit more tall. Next, I wanted to repeat the process for the sides, but I was going to make these sloped, so I decided to cut out a 5/8 inch piece and then split it diagonally down the middle. After I had it all cut out, I glued it together. Here I'm cutting out a piece of scrap cereal box cardboard that I'm going to use for a base for the roof, and I'm going to use this to put some shingles on top of afterwards. So I cut it out just slightly longer than the slope of my roof and glued it to the top with the art side facing up so that I could glue the shingles on to the shiny side of the cardboard using PVA glue so that the super glue would stick better to the underside and I wouldn't have to paint over the shiny part with craft paint and risk having it chip off. And now I'm going to cut out my shingles on my Proxxon. I cut out pieces using the measurements on the Proxxon to make it a little easier on myself. I decided to make some blocks that were 1 centimeter by 2 centimeters and then cut them into thinner slices. So here I just have 2 pieces of 1 centimeter by 2 centimeter, and I'm just cutting them off just like you would cut off a grouping of bricks if you were going to cut them out in mass. It's easier to cut them off like this because it takes less time to cut the 2 sticks taped together than it does to cut out multiple pieces from a single stick. And then I just started assembling my roof using a layered technique, starting from the bottom and working my way up, being careful not to let things slide around too much. You'll notice in the beginning that the shingles ended up being too even, so I had to offset them, which means I had to move things around a little bit. But that's easy enough to do because the PVA glue lets you move things around a little bit before it sets up. Lastly, I'm capping it off with a strip of scrap XPS foam from the shingles. Okay folks, this part needs no introduction. Anytime that I do foam, I use this mixture of matte Mod Podge and black paint. There's really no need to do anything else for this for me, and even here on the cardboard I'm using the same thing. It's the same old technique that's been around forever. So use whatever you think is best, but this is the thing that I like best for me. I decided to base coat these in brown so that any color that I put over them would have, if I missed a spot or anything like that, you wouldn't see the white-ish wood showing through. You'd see the brown coming through instead. And I mean, it's not necessarily a realistic wood color, but it doesn't have to be. It's just, it may even be a little bit cartoonish, and that's perfectly okay for this project. I liked the brown that I chose. And I went over the top of the shingles with some more black paint afterwards to make sure that they were black. The black Mod Podge tends to be a little bit more on the dark gray side than on the black side. Now for the theme colors of our circus, I'm using red and white. Here I'm using a Craft Smart Crimson and just a plain old Craft Smart white paint This is just plain craft paint. You can find it in the aisle in the craft department at Walmart. You can find it at Michael's. You can even buy it online. It's all the same as long as you just make sure that you use multiple layers here if your paint's thin, and just take your time on these things and not spread it around too much. Although here you can see it does look a little bit roughshod, which is the look that I was going for. It was hastily thrown up as the carnival had moved into town or some such. Lastly, I hit the grating with a dry brushing of silver to give it a metallic finish. I'm going to attempt something that I've been experimenting with in the past, but I haven't really done on a finished piece, and that's I'm going to try decoupage using some matte Mod Podge. And here I just have some inkjet pictures printed from an inkjet printer on some plain old paper that I made up in Photoshop to add a little bit more flair to my booths. I'm not a graphic designer and by any stretch of the imagination. This stuff is just free images that I found online, so I'm not going to provide any images or files for this stuff. You can find this stuff online just as easily as I did. Free fonts, Google search for images, and just piece it all together. From what I read, the instructions for the decoupage say to paint what you're going to put on, put the sticker on first using the Mod Podge, and then place the piece on top, and then paint a couple, 2 or 3 coats over the top of it. This ended up working perfectly, and aside from the seams on the side, which I try to improve in the future, I decided to just let them stand. And here you can see I decided to try to paint on the lower portion because I had printed out white lettering, so I went back to the computer and printed out some red lettering and made some white planks to put the red lettering on because I thought the contrast was better, and it was easier to cut out just having the white background on the paper to glue over the white paint than it was to try to cut the little white portions out. It said the ticket price was, 5 silver. It was a little easier to do this than it was to try to cut out the little numbers to get them to fit onto the red portion of the booth instead of just doing this, what I did here. And this method of applying decals worked out pretty well. Have it. I mean, it's kind of a long video for such a small project, but these things are so easy to make. It was ridiculous. I definitely would have done a couple of things differently, such as I would have textured my shingles a little better, and the seams around the outsides of the stickers, I would try to figure out a better way to do that next time. But overall, these things just came out. I'm so happy with the way they came out. I'm so pleased with them. Thank you everybody for sticking around. I'm hoping it was as fun for you as it was for me. Making this carnival project has been quite the experience for me. I have never attempted anything quite this ambitious before. To make a whole set that's all, you know, matching and congruous with each other, all at the same time. So it's been a lot. It's been an adventure this last month or so doing this. That being said, we only have a couple more videos left. I'm probably gonna push it out to the end of May, and we'll see where we're at then, whether or not I feel the carnival's finished or not, and then I'll start presenting you guys with the finished product, the adventure that I have to go along with it, and all that stuff. That being said, if you have derived value from this video or from my channel in general, please consider becoming a subscriber on Patreon. For only $1 or more a month, you can help support me and what I'm doing here. If you like the channel and want to see that thrive on YouTube, please consider hitting the subscription button below and ring that little notification bell so you know when I post new content. And also, you know, don't forget to leave a like and a comment. What kinds of things have you attempted that have been outside the scope of what you would normally do? I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Have a good week, everybody, and we'll see you next time. I've been the Dungeon Mattster. Take care.